Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Most of you know me as Clifton Bryant and my own podcast, I'm Just Saying. But tonight I'm doing a special podcast. It is to talk briefly on the title of my new book. Let me see if I can line it up right. The Invisible America by Anab. The full title of the book is The Invisible America. Why is the wealthiest country in the world hiding its most embarrassing failure of all time, the war to end poverty? The title Anav comes from the Hebrew word, which means I am the poor. So it's synonymous with the book's topic, poverty. What makes this book so important and worth reading? It discusses one topic you have not heard during the entire presidential election or for any political office election. What are we doing for the poor? According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 11.6% of the population, or 37.9 millions of people, are living in poverty in the United States. This should be hard to believe, considering that President Johnson declared the war on poverty in 1964, but it's clearly evident by the number, being 37.9 million people living in poverty, that our past and current leaders occupying a political seat has not done a thing. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of each chapter. It's a total of 12 in all. And I hope that when I finish this presentation, it will help you want to know more about the poverty situation in the United States and give you the desire to vote, as well as scare politicians at the same time. Chapter 1 says how poverty is manufactured in America. Now, I know you heard that correctly. Is poverty manufactured? Well, poverty in the United States exists by no accident. It's an artificial it's an artificial resource created by business people and corrupt politicians to have a constant workforce incapable of rising above the federally established poverty line and paying them less and demanding that they work more and harder to maintain employment. This chapter discusses several issues related to poverty, such as, is the American dream a reality for everyone? What is the social class system? And why is it so important to America? How do business people in the United States control the destiny of workers? What are the excuses used by the blind and the wealthy about the status of the poor? What is the social class system defined in America? What is the poverty index? What aid is available for poverty stricken? Why can't we win the war on poverty that started in 1964? And what are empowerment categories and which do you fall into? Finally, the faces of poverty and how you can overcome the stronghold of poverty. In chapter 2, which is titled, Do Today's Political Leaders Have the Necessary Characteristics, Traits, and Ethics to Govern the United States? To win the war on poverty, first we must expose it, followed by that developing a strategy to defeat it. This chapter focuses on the characteristics, traits, and ethics of the leaderships desperately needed in the United States, from the corporate and small business level to the highest level to the United States Congress, and finally the President of the United States. In chapter 3, we talk about how poverty affects everyone around you. I broke this chapter into 2 parts, so this is part 1. How poverty affects everyone around you. In the very beginning, I used the illustration of the 3 monkeys. We all know them as see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. I use those as an illustration of how everyone sees poverty in America. Following by that, we talk about the various categories within poverty-stricken communities, followed by the war on drugs, poverty and incarceration, poverty and gun violence, and the misconception of the Second Amendment to justify current gun laws. In chapter 4, we talk about how poverty affects everything around you Part 2. This discusses the images of public schools in poverty-stricken communities that have been abandoned, the reformation of public school systems over the years, what parents and school officials need to do to work together as a cohesive team to attack poverty in the public school system, why school teachers are paid less than teachers not in poverty-stricken public schools. And then we can also discuss about the credit woes and their efforts on the impoverished, how financial institutions are bailed out of their debts, but will not provide financial relief for people with negative credit histories at a reasonable rate. Some crimes have less punishments in comparison to the length of an adverse credit history on your credit report. Excuse me for a second. Chapter 5. Why do we need social welfare reform? Why do we have 83 federal social welfare programs for people with low incomes, and how can they gain access to the current welfare program when linked together can help them to overcome poverty permanently? Are TANF and SNAP the only benefits that can be connected? What is Medicaid and what it affects? What should I expect from beneficiary programs if I was on Medicaid? And then what's the next one? I'm going a little bit too fast. We know what the Affordable Health Care Act is, but I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into it. Who are the beneficiaries? Who's fighting for supremacy over the healthcare insurance companies? Who chooses to tell the physicians what they can and can't do governing your health? Chapter 6. Who needs enemies when you have poverty as a friend? Very simple. What is the predatory trait of poverty? How people cannot feel the sun's rays when they still have umbrellas covering them. What are the shared attributes of poverty and hereditary issues? Why do people born in poverty suffer from mental illness? What types of mental health treatment is available for people living in poverty? And what roles does poverty have to do with the incarceration of certain social groups in the United States? Moving on to Chapter 7. Is Social Security insurance benefits enough for people living in poverty? For people living in poverty and the recipients of SSI, the struggle continues to survive on benefits from an archaic system to help those who can't earn a living for themselves. What is SSI and when does it come into the picture? How do you apply for SSI? Is SSI enough to provide for the everyday needs of those living in poverty? How is your state providing aid with SSI? And finally, what can you and your government do to make SSI benefits better for people living in poverty? Chapter 8. And it's titled, Would you please consider allocating foreign aid funds taken from our taxes to use against the U.S. war on poverty? Question mark. The United States provide foreign aid to countries requesting financial aid assistance to combat their wars against domestic and foreign enemies and the war on poverty in their country. Every year, they ask us for a helping hand, but have not shown us not one drop of the changes in their country since we've been giving them money. In the meantime, our country in certain areas are starting to resemble the appearance of a third world country. The only difference is there's not bombshells and holes in buildings. Our evidence shows that the U.S. has more people in poverty and requiring more funding to break them out of the stranglehold of poverty than the foreign aid we generously give to other countries. That never show us proof. Where's the accountability in this? Chapter 9. When is it ever right for veterans and active duty service members to be on the threshold of poverty? Question mark again. The price of freedom in the United States is paid by the sacrifice of the men and women who volunteer to support and defend our country as service members in the United States military. In exchange for their protection against foreign and domestic enemies, we have the right to live the American freedom. And I say we because I am a veteran. This doesn't apply for the people in the lower class, unfortunately. And you have to go back and read chapter 1 to understand why. Our government is aware of both active duty retirees and veterans living on supplemental assistance. Why won't they increase their pay? Recognize the hunger issues of some active duty service members and not making the needed changes worthy of the people who volunteer to serve is unfortunate and worthy of every American screaming, what's going on? Chapter 10. How are we coming to the aid of our homeless veterans in the United States? This chapter relates to the homeless veterans in the United States in this order. What are the layman's understandings of mental illness? What categories of former service members and veterans are likely to become homeless? How are veterans and former service members affected by poverty? How does the government assist our veterans during their most fantastic time of need? How do family members of veterans and former service members help them adjust from the military life where they may return to the status of life before military or sadly never return to that status? And finally, how can we make this a political issue so our veterans and former service members won't suffer in silence any longer? Chapter 11. Why are politicians confused about helping people living in poverty? Okay, so the possible reasons our politicians fail to end the war on poverty is based on these issues, such as failed communication with the voters and politicians. How quickly our politicians forget about the ongoing war against poverty while going on a fighting frenzy to bring immigrants to the United States. Our voters holding politicians above their career capabilities. Here are some perks. Here's some more topics in chapter 11. What are the perks of politicians and their supporting of their constituents instead of doing their job of supporting you? There are repercussions of being the poor because of the lack of work by politicians. The ideology that explains why politicians are incapable of telling the truth. And there's two more. The war and done movement. That's worth reading as well. Why does the Democratic Party fight so hard among each other? And finally, why do Republicans seem more unified in their party? And then finally, we have chapter 12, which is titled Final Thoughts. What can the government do to better our nation? You want to read chapter 12 to know what better they can do? Please do so. I would love everyone in America to buy this book. It's titled The Invisible America. Why is one of the richest countries in the world hiding its most embarrassing failure of all time, the war to end poverty? The pen name author of this book is Anav, A-N-A-V, and it's Hebrew for the word I am poor. You can buy this book available on Amazon and on other websites where there is this book advertised. It comes in 3 formats. It comes in the format of paperback, ebook, and hard copy. I ask everyone to make a sacrifice and consider buying this book for yourself, for your friend. Make it a family discussion. And when I say family, I mean literally your whole family come together. Make it a family discussion. Get registered to vote. Let the politicians know that their days are numbered, because you do not have to accept their silence for not fighting the war on poverty. And you don't have to accept them not making any changes in our social welfare system, where if I enrolled in this program, and this program, in 3 years I'll be out of poverty. I ask humbly that you take this into consideration and please buy my book. Thank you, and have a good evening.